Imagine the one person you trust most in this world, your own family, betrays you in the most unimaginable way. A woman spends her life building a family, only to discover the ones she loves the most have been plotting against her all along. A woman with a deep secret. A betrayal that went beyond anything she could have imagined. And a life insurance policy worth $1.7 million. A fortune that would change everything. But when her husband, a man younger than her, went to claim it, he was blindsided by a truth that shattered everything he thought he knew. What happens when love turns into a deadly game of revenge? And who pays the ultimate price? This is the story of betrayal, and the incredible revenge one woman took from beyond the grave. The cold silence of a funeral, a husband standing alone with a mask of grief on his face. In his hands, the life-changing documents, the papers handed to him by the lawyer, a final testament of a life that was never what it seemed. But the real shock was just beginning. How far can betrayal go? What if the one person you trusted the most turned out to be your greatest enemy? This is a story you won't forget. Stay with us as we unravel a tale of love, lies, and the devastating consequences that followed. Dolores Evans was no stranger to hardship. At 70 years old, she had seen the world through sharp eyes, her mind always calculating, always one step ahead. A successful businesswoman, well-respected in her community, she built a life from the ground up. But despite the outward success, there was always something hollow in her heart. Something she couldn't fix with money or status. Before Roger, Dolores had been married once. Her first husband, Malcolm Evans, had been a kind and loving man, but life had taken a toll on their marriage. Malcolm, a quiet, dependable man, was nothing like Roger. They had built a life together, filled with love and shared dreams. But when Malcolm passed away unexpectedly, Dolores found herself alone, grieving the loss of the man she had planned to spend the rest of her life with. His death left a void in her life, a deep personal loss she would never fully recover from. It was only after several years of mourning that Dolores met Roger Williams. He was younger, full of energy, and offered Dolores a new kind of companionship. But from the moment they married, something didn't sit right with her. Roger, only 50 years old, seemed more interested in her wealth than in her heart. His charm and good looks made him irresistible to Dolores at first, but over time, she began to sense something darker beneath the surface. The marriage, on the outside, appeared perfect, an older, successful woman with her younger, ambitious husband. But Dolores's sharp intuition told her otherwise. Her suspicions grew as time went on. The way Roger's affections seemed to wane, the distant glances, and the unspoken tension between them, Dolores began to question whether their marriage was truly built on love, or if she had simply become a means to an end. How well do we really know the people closest to us? Could you ever imagine someone you love betraying you in the worst way? Roger Williams had always been a man of opportunity. A man who knew how to take advantage of the right situation. He was charming, manipulative, and always seemed to be in the right place at the right time. When he met Dolores, he saw more than a partner, he saw a future. And it was one that came with a hefty price tag. Roger's attraction to Dolores was not just about her beauty, but about the life she had built, a life of comfort, luxury, and wealth. He saw his chance to secure a future for himself, one that would free him from the struggles of his own making. What Dolores failed to see, however, was how much Roger's interest in her was fueled by his desire for material gain. He had no true love for her, and his emotional distance became more apparent as time passed. It was clear that their marriage had slowly devolved into a business transaction, a way for Roger to live the life he had always dreamed of. But then, Dolores made a devastating discovery, one that would rock the very foundation of their relationship. Roger had been having an affair. But this wasn't just any affair. It was with Serafina, her own daughter, the woman she had raised and loved as her own. A cruel betrayal that went deeper than she could have ever imagined. Dolores knew about the affair. She had known for months, possibly even longer, but she kept it to herself. She watched as Roger and Serafina's secret grew more and more obvious, yet she said nothing. The pain of being betrayed by both the man she married and the daughter she had loved was almost too much to bear. But Dolores wasn't a woman who acted impulsively. She kept her emotions in check, buried her pain, and decided to take her time. She wasn't ready to confront them, at least, not yet. But deep down, she knew that when the time came, she would make them both pay. Could you ever forgive someone who betrays you in such a horrific way? Or would you make them pay? Dolores had spent so many years in silence, watching as her world slowly crumbled around her. But her loyalty to her shared life with Roger, and the belief that she could protect her daughter, kept her grounded. In a strange way, Dolores clung to the illusion that she could fix it all, that, somehow, the damage could be repaired. Roger's disregard for her pain was evident in everything he did, but Dolores held on to the hope that there was still some small piece of their life together that she could salvage. She held on for the sake of the family, for the sake of the home they had built. But with each passing day, it became clearer that Roger's betrayal was not just an affair, it was a deeper, more calculated decision. He didn't care about her or Serafina, he only cared about what they could give him. This marriage, once founded on shared promises, had long since become a mere illusion. How long could Dolores endure this silent suffering? How much pain would it take before she took control and made sure they knew what it felt like to lose everything? Then there was Serafina Williams, Dolores's own flesh and blood, the daughter she had raised, the one she had poured all her love and care into. But their relationship was not what it seemed. From the beginning, Serafina had felt a distance between herself and her mother. Growing up, Dolores had always been focused on her business, leaving little room for emotional connection. Serafina felt abandoned, neglected in the shadow of Dolores's ambitions. She longed for love, for attention that Dolores couldn't provide. It was during this time of emotional vulnerability that Roger came into the picture, and he saw an opportunity. He manipulated Serafina's need for love and affection, playing on her insecurities, offering her the attention that Dolores could not give. What began as a seemingly innocent connection between Roger and Serafina slowly turned into an affair, one that Dolores knew about but kept silently watching as the betrayal unfolded before her eyes. Serafina's betrayal was a quiet one, but it hurt Dolores in ways she couldn't fully express. To know that the person who should have been the closest to her, her own daughter, had fallen into the arms of her husband was too much to bear. The pain of it was beyond what words could describe. How would you react if you found out your own daughter was sleeping with your husband? Dolores Evans had always been a woman of control, sharp, composed, and never one to act without thinking. Yet, as time went on, something shifted in her. The betrayal she'd been silently enduring, the affair between her husband Roger and her daughter Serafina, began to take a toll not only on her heart but on her body as well. The weight of knowing the truth and keeping it locked inside, pretending everything was fine, was taking its toll in ways she hadn't expected. The stress, the emotional strain, was manifesting in physical ways she could no longer ignore. Her once sharp mind, always calculating, always in control, began to feel clouded. At first, it was subtle, a mild headache that would come and go, a sense of fatigue that she brushed off as a result of too much work. But over time, it grew worse. The headaches became constant, the fatigue overwhelming. She started feeling weak, as if something inside her was slowly unraveling. The doctors told her it was just the result of stress, too much work, not enough rest. But Dolores knew deep down that this wasn't just about lack of sleep. It was something more. Something deeper. She found herself visiting countless doctors, trying to find answers. No one could pinpoint what was truly wrong. They told her it was just the stress of running a business, the physical toll of years of hard work catching up to her. But it was clear that this wasn't just about a busy schedule. Dolores felt like her body was betraying her, just like the people she had trusted most in the world. As Dolores's health began to decline, her thoughts were consumed not only with the physical pain she was enduring but with the emotional toll of the situation she could no longer escape. Roger's betrayal, Serafina's betrayal, it all weighed heavily on her. She knew what they had done. She knew it wasn't just about the affair, it was about the lies, the manipulation, the complete disregard for the trust she had placed in them both. She felt alone in a way she had never felt before, even with a husband and daughter by her side. But in that dark place, in the midst of her declining health and the constant ache in her head, Dolores found clarity. She could no longer pretend that everything was fine. She could no longer sit back and watch as the two people she loved most destroyed everything she had built. She would make them pay. And so, Dolores made a decision, a bold, calculated decision that would change everything. In her weakened state, with her health rapidly deteriorating, she took matters into her own hands. She went to her lawyer and changed the beneficiary on her $1.7 million life insurance policy. No longer would Roger be the one to inherit her wealth. No, the person who would receive the money now was Mabel Harris, her loyal maid. Mabel had been with Dolores since Serafina was a child, always there, always dependable, and most importantly, always loyal. Dolores had seen Mabel's unwavering dedication to her family, seen the love and care she gave, especially when Dolores was too distracted by the chaos of her marriage. Mabel had been the one to pick up the pieces, the one to care for Dolores when she was too busy to take care of herself. In her final act of control, Dolores chose to give her wealth to the person who had truly been by her side, not the man who had betrayed her, not the daughter who had stabbed her in the back, but the woman who had shown her the loyalty she had been denied. Dolores's decision wasn't just about the money, it was about power. It was her way of making sure that even in death, she had the last word. Her health was fading, but her mind was sharp. She could no longer trust Roger, who had manipulated her for years, or Serafina, who had been complicit in the betrayal. She had to make sure that when the time came, there would be someone left to protect what she had worked so hard for. But Dolores's decision came too late for her to fully enjoy the peace of mind it brought. Her health continued to decline, and with every passing day, the toll of the betrayal seemed to make her body weaker. The headaches worsened, and the fatigue grew more unbearable. She wasn't sure how much longer she had, but she knew this was her last chance to right the wrongs that had been done to her. As Dolores lay in bed, her body frail and her mind consumed by the betrayal that had defined her last years, she couldn't help but wonder, was she making the right choice? Would this be enough to make Roger and Serafina pay for what they had done? Or would they continue to manipulate and destroy everything she had worked for, even in her absence? It was a cruel irony. Dolores had built a life of success, but in the end, it was the people closest to her who brought her the most pain. Still, despite the betrayal, Dolores's decision was final. There was no turning back. Mabel, the woman who had shown her kindness and loyalty, would be the one to carry on her legacy. But Dolores's health was not the only thing deteriorating. It soon became clear that there was something much more sinister happening behind the scenes, something that went far beyond the emotional betrayal. Mabel, Dolores's trusted maid, had begun to notice strange behavior from both Roger and Serafina. The odd, nervous glances between them, their hushed conversations whenever Mabel was around, it was as if they were hiding something. And then, there was the way Roger always seemed to hover over Dolores during her illness. The way he would always be the first to serve her tea, rushing to her side every time the doctor was called in. His eagerness to tend to Dolores's needs seemed out of place, especially since he had never shown such care before. Serafina, too, seemed oddly invested in her mother's health, though her interest was far from maternal. Her nervous energy around Dolores grew more noticeable, and Mabel couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. She'd often see Serafina slipping in and out of the room, always with a strange look in her eyes. But it was the doctor that Mabel found most suspicious. Why was he always in such a rush to serve Dolores her tea, not taking the time to carefully check on her condition, as a doctor should? Why did he seem so eager to leave every time he visited? It wasn't long before Mabel began to suspect the truth. She watched as Roger and Serafina exchanged looks, whispered words, and what appeared to be a carefully crafted plan. And in the days that followed, Dolores grew weaker. The tea, the one thing she trusted to soothe her, had become the very thing that was poisoning her. Dolores died unexpectedly from what initially appeared to be natural causes. After Dolores's unexpected death, the air was thick with suspicion, though none of her family members dared speak the unspoken truth. Her passing was ruled as natural at first, a victim of her declining health, but the cracks in the story began to show. Mabel, Dolores's loyal maid, who had been there for every doctor's visit and every meal served, knew better. The eerie quiet that followed Dolores's funeral was only the calm before the storm. As Mabel started piecing together what had happened, she realized something that could no longer be ignored, the subtle but steady poison that had been poisoning Dolores's tea for months. The same tea, the one thing she trusted to soothe her, had become the very thing that was poisoning her. Mabel came forward and revealed the truth to the authorities. She shared the chilling details of how Serafina had been administering the poison and how Roger had been complicit in the entire scheme. Mabel's testimony would bring the darkness to light, exposing the betrayal that had been festering under the surface for so long. Roger wasted no time after Dolores's death. He rushed to the insurance company, ready to collect what he thought was rightfully his. His anticipation quickly turned to confusion and then rage. He walked into the office, expecting the life insurance check to be handed over to him, as he had always been the designated beneficiary. But when the clerk handed him the documents, he learned something that shook him to his core. The beneficiary was not Roger. It was Mabel Harris, the maid who had served Dolores loyally for years. The revelation left Roger stunned, confused, enraged, and desperate. He couldn't understand how this had happened. He knew about the affair with Serafina, he knew that Dolores had been suspicious of him, but he never expected this kind of betrayal. The very money he had been anticipating, the very thing he had counted on to secure his future, was now out of his reach. In his mind, the betrayal from Dolores was already too much. But now, to be robbed of the life insurance by someone he dismissed as inconsequential, someone who had no claim to Dolores's wealth? The anger burned deep, and Roger's mind began to race. He couldn't accept it. And just like that, a new plan began to form in his mind. He couldn't let Mabel keep the money. No, he had worked too hard to secure this for himself. There was only one thing left to do, make sure that Mabel, just like Dolores, wouldn't stand in his way. It was a game to him, one that Dolores had unknowingly set in motion by making that final decision. As the investigation deepened, the focus shifted to Serafina. She was brought in for questioning after Mabel's revelations. The detectives were prepared to break her, but they knew they had to approach her carefully. They played on her emotions, showing her the pictures of her mother holding her as a child, memories of love, of a bond that should have never been broken. They spoke gently, patiently, trying to get her to crack under the weight of her guilt. "You loved your mother, didn't you? Why did you do this?" they asked. Serafina sat there, her face pale, her hands trembling. For a moment, it seemed like she might hold her composure, but the weight of the question broke through the walls she had so carefully built around herself. It wasn't the pressure of the detectives, nor the fear of what would happen to her, but the unbearable guilt of her actions that shattered her defenses. To their surprise, Serafina broke down. She confessed everything. Her voice cracked as she admitted that she had done it for love. Love for Roger, the man who had promised her everything. Roger had been the one to orchestrate it all, she confessed. He had made her do it. It had been his idea to poison Dolores, to speed up the process, to make sure that Dolores's death would pave the way for them to finally be together. Serafina's confession was a turning point in the investigation, one that left the detectives stunned. The affair, the poison, it all made sense now. But it was the love she spoke of, the twisted, misguided love, that made everything seem even darker. Do you think Serafina was acting out of love, or was it something much darker than that? Serafina's confession didn't just unravel the events that led to Dolores's death, it also exposed the twisted dynamics of a family torn apart by lies, manipulation, and greed. Roger and Serafina, once so sure of their plan, were now facing the truth of their actions. But even as the investigation moved forward, one question remained: what would justice look like for Dolores Evans, and could it ever be enough to undo the damage done by the ones she trusted most? The investigation into the deaths of Dolores Evans and the shocking betrayal by her own family members reached its peak as the case moved into the courtroom. Serafina's confession had been the turning point, but as the case progressed, the question remained, how much of Roger's involvement was truly known? The prosecutors worked tirelessly to build their case against both Serafina and Roger. The evidence they had was overwhelming: Serafina's confession, the testimony from Mabel, the loyal maid who had witnessed the poison being administered, and the forensic evidence proving Dolores's gradual poisoning over the months. All of these were damning pieces of evidence that painted a clear picture of how Dolores's life had been slowly taken from her by the very people she had trusted. However, Roger's involvement was more complicated. While he had been at the center of the plot, urging Serafina and planning the poisoning, there was a level of doubt as to how much he had directly participated. His manipulation and emotional control over Serafina were undeniable, but the legal question remained: had he been the mastermind, or had he merely been a passive accomplice? This question weighed heavily on the trial, adding a layer of complexity to the courtroom drama. The prosecution was determined to show that Roger wasn't just a passive participant, he had manipulated Serafina, turning her love for him into something twisted. They wanted to prove that his emotional control over Serafina was so strong that it turned her into a willing participant in the murder of her own mother. But Roger's defense team painted a different picture, one where Serafina acted independently, suggesting that the affair between the two was purely a personal matter, and that Roger's only crime was being an unfaithful husband. As the trial continued, Serafina's emotional breakdown during her interrogation was replayed in court, leaving everyone in the room stunned. Her raw confession, detailing how she had poisoned her mother for the man she loved, became a focal point of the prosecution's argument. The courtroom was filled with tension as Serafina's betrayal of Dolores was laid bare for everyone to see. The affair, the poison, the manipulation, it was all part of a larger narrative of family tragedy. But Roger, ever the opportunist, sat in the courtroom seemingly unmoved by the emotional weight of the situation. His cold demeanor only fueled the prosecution's case that he was the true orchestrator of this terrible plan. They argued that he had been the one to manipulate Serafina, to get her to carry out his wishes and ensure that Dolores's death would benefit them both. Question to audience: do you think Serafina and Roger deserve the same punishment? Or is one more responsible than the other? As the trial reached its conclusion, the tension in the courtroom was palpable. The defense tried to paint Roger as a victim of Serafina's misguided love, but the prosecution wasn't swayed. The facts were clear, the evidence overwhelming. Serafina had confessed. Mabel had testified. And forensic evidence had confirmed that Dolores had been poisoned over the course of months. The jury deliberated for hours, and when the verdict was finally read, the room went quiet. Both Serafina and Roger were found guilty of the crime. Serafina was sentenced to life in prison for the murder of her mother. The emotional weight of her actions, her betrayal of the woman who had given her life, was something that could never be undone. Her guilt was overwhelming, and the verdict reflected the severity of the crime. But Roger's sentence was harsher. Also life in prison. While Serafina's crime was rooted in an emotional, misguided love, Roger's crime was rooted in cold, calculated manipulation. The jury found him guilty of conspiracy to commit murder and being the mastermind behind the poisoning. His sentence was longer, reflecting his role in orchestrating the crime and exploiting Serafina's vulnerability. The sentencing was the final chapter in the courtroom drama, but it didn't erase the emotional scars left on everyone involved. Justice had been served, at least in the eyes of the law, but for those who were left behind, the pain was far from over. Dolores had been betrayed by her own family, the people she loved the most, and no sentence could undo the damage that had been done. The courtroom had found them guilty, but the emotional fallout for Mabel, the one who had stood by Dolores's side all those years, was still ongoing. She had seen the family's dark side, but the depth of betrayal she witnessed shook her to her core. She had lost the woman she had cared for like family, and now, she had to live with the knowledge that the people closest to Dolores were the ones who had taken her life. Question to audience: what is justice in a case like this? Is it truly served? The court declared that justice had been served, but the question of whether it was enough lingered. Was the punishment fitting for the crime? Did Serafina and Roger truly understand the depth of their betrayal? Could justice heal the wounds they had caused, or was this just the beginning of a much deeper reckoning? The trial may have ended, but the scars would last a lifetime. Dolores's final act of justice was her decision to change the beneficiary of her $1.7 million life insurance policy to Mabel, her loyal maid. Even in death, she made sure that Roger and Serafina would not benefit from their betrayal. She chose to reward the one person who had stayed true to her, securing Mabel's future as a testament to the loyalty Dolores had been denied. If you were in Dolores's shoes, would you have made the same decision? Would you have chosen revenge, or found another way to deal with betrayal? This story forces us to question what true justice really is. Can money ever fix the damage done by betrayal? Or is the emotional cost far greater than anything wealth can repair? What do you think? Was justice served? What would you have done in Dolores's shoes? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Betrayal can break hearts and shatter lives, leaving scars that no amount of money can fix. Yet, Dolores found a way to make sure she was not forgotten, even after her death. Please subscribe for more stories like this.